I've seen people on my social media talk about, my liberal friends talk about, oh, what about intersex? Intersex is the key to prove that all this is wrong and that they don't know what they're talking about. But we know about the intersex myth. And so I think that if this executive order gets people to talk about, what sex is, what intersex, quote unquote, is and it isn't, and especially if there are challenges to this in court, I just think all of that is going to be beneficial to us in the long run, dispelling those myths about how people can be anything other than male or female.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for Friday, January 24th, 2025. We are here with Carol, Jose, and me, Arianne. First, a summary of this week's news. A Long Island judge upholds law that protects women in girls' sports. A Scottish nurse is in legal trouble over refusing to acknowledge a trans-identified colleague's gender identity. The Women's March, now the People's March, was held last weekend with counter-protests. A North Dakota bill is introduced that authorizes social workers to perform convergent therapy. Feminist writer Andreia Nobre is being sued in Brazil for alleged transphobia. The U.S. Supreme Court agrees to take up a case regarding parental rights and LGBTQ plus content in schools. And finally, President Trump declares there are only two sexes in a new executive order. And now, Jose, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Ariane. In Nassau County, New York, a recent court decision has upheld a local law designed to preserve fairness in women's sports. The law, passed in 2023, requires teams using public facilities to identify all male, all female, or mixed sex based on players' original birth certificates. The law faced backlash from a local roller derby team, Roller Rebels, who include a trans-identified male player. The Rebels, represented by the New York Civil Liberties Union, argued that the law violates New York's human rights law, which prohibits gender identity discrimination. They sought a preliminary injunction to temporarily block the law while the case is litigated, claiming it inflicted irreparable harm and, quote, dignitary wounds on transgender individuals. Judge Bruce Cousins denied the request, stating that there was no evidence the law causes harm simply by requiring teams with male players to disclose their mixed sex status. Cousins emphasized the biological differences between males and females, asserting that allowing male athletes in women's contact sports could endanger female participants. Roller derby, known for its aggressive, high-speed gameplay, carries significant injury risks. The Roller Rebels, affiliated with the Women's Flag Track Derby Association, argue that their league's inclusivity is critical for fostering teamwork and joy through sport. However, opponents, including Nassau County officials, maintain that ensuring fair competition and safety for female athletes must take priority. The ruling does not end the legal battle. The Rebels and the NYCLU plan to appeal, and the separate lawsuit filed by the state of New York is ongoing. Both cases could set significant precedents for how gender identity laws apply to sports in New York. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Carol.
Thank you, Jose. So we're going to go to North Dakota first here. There's some news out of North Dakota thanks to a local lesbian who was concerned about a new bill her state has introduced, and she passed it along to me. So North Dakota House Bill 1430 will create and enact a new section to Chapter 43 through 41 of North Dakota Century Code related to the regulation of social workers. The bill is sponsored by 12 Republican representatives. The bill reads as follows. This is directly. Quote, ethics, caring for individuals questioning sexuality and gender identity. 1, it is not an ethical violation for a licensee to offer an individual questioning the individual's sexuality or gender a treatment plan or counseling plan that aligns with heterosexuality or the individual's biological sex. 2, as a condition of engaging in practices or treatment under this section, a licensee, A, shall disclose to the individual being treated or that individual's parent or guardian the nature of the treatment or practices, and B, must have received authorization from the individual being treated, or that individual's parents or guardian to engage in the practices or treatments. Now, to me, this bill looks like it is opening the gate to gay conversion therapy here. It puts together homosexuality and trans identity. This is a perfect example of forced teaming working in this case to actually harm gays and lesbians and bisexual folks. It's unfortunate to see this, but I'm not surprised. On to the Women's March. As we reported last time on the News Roundup, the Women's March had been changed to the People's March to be more inclusive. Well, here in California, Women Are Real, a feminist group based out of San Francisco, decided to show up for the new People's March with some of their own signs. Signs saying, quote, Women's March, stop erasing women. Another one, let's see, Bay Area native, lifelong liberal, lesbian, anti-gender. And another one, quote, free speech for women. That's just to name a few. The response from the other people at the People's March is interesting. They seem to not like the messaging of women's rights. We will link Women Are Real's Instagram and X account so you can see their demonstration for yourself. Great job, ladies. San Francisco is a rough spot to stand up for women's sex-based rights in, and they capture some pretty good video, so definitely go watch that. So let's go to Scotland. In a recent legal dispute, NHS National Health Service Fife sought to prevent nurse Sandy Peggy from referring to Dr. Beth Upton, a trans-identified male, using male pronouns during an employment tribunal. Peggy had previously raised concerns about sharing a female changing room with Dr. Upton at Victoria Hospital in Kirkcaldy, leading to her suspension and subsequent legal action against NHS and Dr. Upton on grounds of harassment. During preliminary hearings, NHS legal representative Jane Russell argued that Peggy's use of male pronouns constituted gratuitous misgendering, causing, quote, pain and harm to Dr. Upton. Russell emphasized that such language contributed to a, quote, climate of hostility and hatred towards trans people, end quote, and argued the tribunal to mandate the use of neutral terms when referring to Dr. Upton. In response, Peggy's counsel, Naomi Cunningham, contended that the case centered on whether Dr. Upton should be permitted in female-only spaces, asserting that referring to Dr. Upton with female pronouns would undermine the clarity of the argument. Cunningham stated, quote, it is impossible to put that case clearly and forcefully while referring to the man in question as she and paying lip service to the fiction that he is a kind of woman, end quote. Employment Judge Sandy Kemp indicated that a decision regarding the language to be used during the tribunal would be issued in the coming days. The full hearing is scheduled to commence on February 3rd in Edinburgh. Arianne?
Thank you, Carol. So first, some news from Brazil. On January 16th, radical feminist writer Andreia Nobre announced on X that she is being sued in her native Brazil for, quote-unquote, evident acts of transphobia. This is on account of an article she wrote for the feminist publication 4W about a trans-identifying man with male genitalia named Kim Flores Carlos, who was refused service at a waxing salon. Nobre says that the reports she received regarding the lawsuit complained that she called Carlos a man in the 4W article. Nobre offered an update on the case on January 23rd, saying that her summons arrived at her mother's house in Brazil on the 16th of January rather than her current address abroad. Her mother signed the summons, not realizing that she did not have to, resulting in the summons being rendered official. Nobre has 15 days to contest the accusations, and she is not hopeful by her own admission. Nobre also reports that the Brazilian waxing salon, which originally won their lawsuit, has been notified again. We wish Andreia Nobre and the waxing salon our best of wishes in this legal fight. Now, back here in the United States, on January 17th, the Supreme Court of the United States agreed to hear the case of a group of parents in Montgomery County, Maryland, who claimed they were denied the right to opt their elementary school-age children out of classes that use LGBTQ+ books. The parents claim these books are often explicit and violate their religious beliefs. One such book, Pride Puppy, for kindergarten and pre-kindergarten, describes a puppy encountering various people and objects at a pride parade, including drag queens and kings, Marsha P. Johnson, leather, underwear, and other items. Another book called Intersection Allies is geared towards kindergarten through 5th grade and invites kids to consider transgender and non-binary identities as well as pronouns. Now, lower courts have previously ruled against the parents, agreeing with the school officials' claim that these books are not part of a coercive curriculum, but are simply available to students. However, the parents' petition to the court paints a different picture. According to the parents' petition, teachers are required to read at least one of the books to their students each year, and that the school board does not dispute the fact. The complaint also cites the board as conceding, quote, "Any child may come away from the instruction with a new perspective not easily contravened by their parents," unquote. It shouldn't surprise us that the U.S. Supreme Court, with a 6-3 conservative majority, is going to be more sympathetic to the parents and is willing to grant them another hearing, and we'll keep you updated about this case. And more big news from the United States. On January 20th, 2025, recently sworn-in President Donald Trump signed an executive order titled, quote, "Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government," unquote, implementing significant policy changes regarding gender recognition and rights. Here are the key provisions of the order. First, it establishes a binary definition of sex. The federal government will now recognize only two immutable sexes, male and female, determined at birth. It will also have identity document changes. So the Department of State is directed to remove X gender marker options from U.S. passports, reverting to the previous policy of recognizing only male or female designations. This also going to be one other provision involves federal facilities. The Bureau of Prisons is instructed to house inmates based on their biological sex at birth, effectively ending the practice of placing trans-identified males in women's prisons. It also applies to healthcare access. The order prohibits the use of federal funds for so-called gender-affirming medical care, including for incarcerated individuals, marking a significant shift from prior healthcare policies. And also, it does away with a lot of these diversity programs. So all federal employees working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives have been placed on paid leave pending termination, as the administration moves to dismantle DEI programs across federal agencies. This executive order has been hailed by some as a significant victory for women's rights, particularly in the context of preserving female-only spaces and opportunities. By mandating that federal agencies recognize biological sex rather than gender identity, the policy aims to protect women's sports, prisons, and other facilities from the inclusion of biological men, ensuring safety, fairness, and equity for women and girls. Supporters argue that this approach reinforces the original intent of Title IX and other legal protections for women, safeguarding their rights in areas where physical differences between the sexes can create disparities. For many advocates, this represents a crucial step in prioritizing women's needs and interests in policymaking. LGBT Alliance USA is cautiously optimistic these orders will move focus back to biological realities, which aligns with our mission to advocate for the right of lesbians, gay men, and bisexual individuals as distinct from broader gender identity movements. However, while President Trump can issue executive orders to shape federal policy, the implementation and longevity of such orders depends on their alignment with existing laws and constitutional principles. Legal challenges and judicial review serve as checks on the scope of presidential power in this context. We will cover the outcomes of these orders in future news roundups. And we'd also like to address a couple of concerns some of our allies and supporters might have about this bill. One concern is that this order repeals provisions protecting LGBT people from discrimination. For example, Section 7.2c withdraws various guideline documents, including ones involving LGBTQI+ discrimination. For example, quote, U.S. Department of Education Toolkit, creating inclusive and non-discriminatory school environments for LGBTQI+ students, unquote. However, these documents, as their title suggests, don't just deal with LGB issues, but also TQI+. And so it makes sense that they would need to be tossed in compliance with the executive order. There are various statutes that protect discrimination due to sexual orientation by using pre-existing prohibitions against sex discrimination. The Unyielding Bicyclist has talked about this in one of her Substack articles, and we'll leave a link to the article below. In other words, there are ways to protect LGBT people from discrimination that this particular executive order does not affect. Another concern that some women's rights advocates have revolves around Section 2D and E, which offers the following definitions. Quote, female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces large reproductive cells, and male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell, unquote. Some women's rights advocates are worried this could be used to establish legal recognition of fetal personhood and hence ban or restrict abortion. This is a tricky one because it's absolutely correct scientifically that sexual differentiation begins at conception. That said, given our current political environment in which abortion rights are hotly debated, it is understandable that some would feel that wording like this could open a can of worms. It should be noted that the person who wrote these rules is May Mailman, who recently became Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Policy Strategist. Mailman was formerly the legal director of the Independent Women's Forum, an organization that, while conservative and very opposed to gender ideology, takes no public stance on abortion rights or gay rights. For that reason, I'm guessing Mailman is used to writing legal documents that avoid directly addressing those issues. We'll have to wait and see how the Trump administration will handle reproductive rights and LGBT rights. How will he balance the demands of the religious right on one hand with more moderates on the other? So how do you two feel about this executive order?
I guess my theory on it is they got one thing right, but in my opinion they have 10 wrong. So I feel like, I don't know, I don't feel that good about it, to be honest. That's just, I'm a liberal. I don't feel good about it because I feel like there's a lot of other things that are happening that are actually going to be detrimental to Americans. And this one win, I feel like maybe it wasn't the way to have this win.
That's a very understandable reaction. I'm happy for this executive order on the net, not just because it happened, but because I think that little concern aside about maybe the conception and fetal personhood, I think it actually was very well written, and well written in a way that I think overall could have probably been written by like a women's rights organization like WDI. For the most part, it did not seem like it was something that was written by like a far religious right group that really didn't get it. So I'm glad that it happened that way. Of course, that doesn't mean anything, like you said, about other things that the Trump administration could do. And I'm still waiting to see how the Trump administration is going to deal with things like discrimination discrimination against LGBT people.
I share Carol's sentiment about the whole thing. I've seen people on my social media talk about, my liberal friends talk about, oh, what about intersex? Intersex is the key to prove that all this is wrong and that they don't know what they're talking about. But we know about the intersex myth. And so I think that if this executive order gets people to talk about, what sex is, what intersex, quote unquote, is and it isn't, and especially if there are challenges to this in court, I just think all of that's going to be beneficial to us in the long run, dispelling those myths about how people can be anything other than male or female. So yeah, I'm happy about that.
I mean, that's a fair point. That is a good point. It's hopefully it'll get people to talk. Although not to be pessimistic again, I feel like, the country is so very divided along party lines that it seems like, and because Trump is a little bit more extreme on the Republican side, or the right, that it might be one of those things where the left just ignores it, the right just ignores it, and it just, just keeps going around and around. I don't know, and definitely the inaccuracy of news reports and social media doesn't make the situation even better, any better to like comb through and understand.
In a weird way, I think if the left ignores it, that's not the worst case outcome. And for me, the worst case outcome is the left fights it. And I'm still waiting for, I think my understanding is that groups like the ACLU have not yet committed to suing over this. So I'm curious. I mean, I think it was actually Women Are Real on X who made some point about if the Democrats just don't fight this, they just let Trump have this win, in another 4 years, people will probably forget about it. Or like most people from the general population who aren't, totally focused on this issue will likely be like, okay, whatever. And the Democrat can sort of have a soft reboot and move on. But is that going to happen? Probably not.
I mean, I'm still really concerned about a lot of other stuff, though. I mean, it's, like, for example, the Heritage Foundation has had a really big hand in Trump's stance on things. Like, you can go to their page, you can go to Project 2025, you can look it up for yourself. This is what they're saying. This is not what I'm saying. This is not what I'm getting from liberal media. This is what they're saying. Go look at what they want to get rid of. Go look at what they want to do. And you see all these things and you go, whew. As a liberal, I'm like, wow, I hope not. So, I kind of feel, because there's America is not just gay people, and it's not just women. Or there's brown women that might be affected by this, that white women won't be affected by some things Trump does. So a lot of stuff to think about.
Yeah, and I think also like the story you mentioned about was it North Dakota, where it really does sound like the Republicans are trying to allow social workers to perform conversion therapy against same-sex attracted people. It's not just a question of offering therapeutic care for people who have gender dysphoria. It's actually like changing people's sexual orientation. Plus, and we didn't directly cover this, but there have been some attempts in the state legislatures by Republicans basically making resolutions saying, we hope the Supreme Court repeals Obergefell, which legalized same-sex marriage. They're symbolic gestures, but it goes to show that there are Republicans who still do want to get rid of gay marriage. So we have to
Yeah,
be
I mean, you
sure.
have to stay on guard, I think, all the time. You really do. Especially if you're a minority, your rights are never guaranteed. They you always have to guard them.
I forgot to do it when I was reading, but I wanted to encourage people to check out that video that I was telling Arianne about. It's just really bizarre. Um,
Which video is this?
oh, it's the Rebels, that roller derby
Oh, the
team.
roller derby. Okay.
Yeah, it was uploaded by the ACLU, and you can really see what the narrative is that they're presenting about including these males in women's teams. And as I was telling Ariane, the it ends with this voiceover of a woman saying about, talking about what it means for little girls to like find somewhere with, a place where they're included or something. And there's just footage of this big man just spinning in rollerblades. It's, it's kind of funny and very concerning at the same time.
A little girl who might not fit into the world doesn't realize that there is a world waiting for her that she belongs to.
That's
But
interesting. The ACLU was the one that uploaded the video.
yeah, it's like a short
Okay.
documentary that they did on this case. Um, yeah, and you see the other female teammates saying, how supportive they are of the inclusivity and everything. And I think one of them has like they them on their like shirt or something. Um, but yeah, I saw people in X say, well, obviously they're going to want to have a male player. It makes, gives them an advantage against over other teams. Um,
But man, it's so dangerous. Roller derby is pretty brutal. It can get pretty brutal.
yeah,
I mean, I would not want to be hit by a dude on skates. There's no way. I mean, anyone who's ever interacted with a guy in sports, if any woman who's interacted with a guy in sports know there's a big difference. You feel it. So, yeah.
And it's funny to me that it was the ACLU that highlighted that as if they think that's some sort of win, some propaganda win for them, when it actually, for most reasonable people, probably is the opposite. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again next week.